My name is Elena Mercer. I am 34 years old, and 3 nights before my wedding, my future father in law stood up in the middle of a private dinner, lifted a glass of red wine, and told 42 guests that his son was making the biggest mistake of his life by marrying a woman who came from nothing. He said it slowly, clearly, like he wanted every person in that room to remember the sentence later. Then he looked directly at me and smiled. My fiancé froze beside me. The room went silent. Someone near the back actually laughed nervously because they thought it had to be a joke. It was not a joke. And what Victor Hale did not realize was that 2 hours earlier, I had already copied every email, every voice memo, and every private message he thought had disappeared forever. He thought he was humiliating me. What he did not understand was that he had spent the last year documenting his own destruction for me piece by piece. I grew up in Reno, Nevada, in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that smelled like bleach and hot metal. My mother worked double shifts at a casino buffet. My father left before I learned how to read. Most nights, dinner was noodles, canned soup, or whatever my mother brought home, wrapped in foil after work. We did not have family vacations or holiday traditions, or money hidden away for emergencies. We had overdue notices tucked under magnets on the refrigerator, and one rule repeated constantly in our apartment: do not depend on anybody to save you. By 16, I was stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store. By 21, I had graduated from college with loans that made my stomach hurt every time I opened my banking app. By 28, I had built a financial consulting firm with 2 employees and a rented office above a dentist in Wool, Arlington. By 34, I had 12 employees, corporate contracts across 3 states, and enough stability that my mother finally quit working weekends. Nobody handed me anything. Every dollar I owned had fingerprints on it. Then I met Daniel Hale at a hotel bar during a leadership conference in Chicago. He ordered whiskey, hated networking events, and spent 20 minutes pretending not to recognize me from the panel discussion I had spoken on earlier that afternoon. He was calm in a way that made other people slow down around him. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. No performance, no fake charm. Halfway through the conversation, he admitted he had Googled me before walking over because he thought I looked familiar. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. We spent 4 hours talking in the corner booth, while the conference around us slowly emptied out. Daniel came from a world completely different from mine. His family owned commercial property across the East Coast. Old money, quiet money, the kind that never talks about wealth because everybody already knows it is there. His father, Victor Hale, built his reputation in private equity and spent 30 years collecting influence the way some people collect watches. Expensive politicians knew his first name. University boards invited him to private dinners. Country clubs waived rules for him. Daniel wanted none of it. He worked as an architect, lived in a modest townhouse in Alexandria, drove the same Jeep for 8 years, and forgot to answer texts for entire afternoons because he got distracted, sketching building designs by hand. He was the first man I had ever dated who did not seem threatened by ambition. When I told him about my business, he asked thoughtful questions instead of making jokes. When I told him about my childhood, he did not lower his voice with pity. He just nodded and said, "That must have made you strong early." There are sentences people remember forever because nobody had ever framed their life that way before. That was one of mine. I met Victor Hale 4 months later at a dinner party in Georgetown. Before he shook my hand, he looked at my shoes. Black heels, scuffed slightly near the left toe from rushing through airports. Tiny detail. Most people would not notice. Victor noticed immediately. Then he looked at my face and smiled politely with the kind of expression wealthy men use when they have already reached a conclusion about you before you speak. "Elena," he said smoothly, "Daniel tells me you're self-employed. Self-employed. Not the founder, not a consultant, not a business owner. One word designed to reduce years of work into something temporary and unimpressive." Throughout dinner, he asked precise questions disguised as casual conversation. Where did your parents summer when you were growing up? What schools did your family usually attend? Do you still have relatives in Nevada? Every question had the same purpose: measurement, classification, placement. He was trying to understand where I belonged in his mental hierarchy. Near the end of the night, he walked me toward the front entrance while Daniel grabbed our coats. The hallway walls were lined with black and white family photographs going back decades. Men in tailored suits, women in pearls. Generations preserved in silver frames. Victor stopped beside one photograph and folded his hands calmly. Legacy matters more than people realize, he said. Families survive because standards survive. Then he smiled again. Daniel has always been idealistic. I just hope he understands marriage is not charity. He said it softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. I drove home gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. Daniel proposed 11 months later on a rooftop overlooking the Potomac just after sunset. No photographers, no orchestra hidden nearby, no speech rehearsed for social media, just him standing there nervous with a ring in one hand asking if I wanted to build a life together. I said yes before he finished the sentence. For exactly 12 hours, everything felt uncomplicated. Then Victor called. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "We should discuss logistics immediately." Logistics. Not happiness, not celebration. Logistics. Within 2 days, he had emailed venue suggestions, guest recommendations, seating ideas, and introductions to event coordinators I had never asked for. He moved through wedding planning like a CEO taking over a failing department. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. At first, I convinced myself he was simply controlling. Some wealthy families operate that way. They organize emotions the same way they organize investments. But slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. My college friends were placed at tables near the kitchen. His business partners received premium seating beside the dance floor. The rehearsal dinner guest list mysteriously excluded 3 people from my side until I noticed and corrected it. A florist called me privately to confirm whether I really wanted white orchids removed from the ceremony because Mr. Hale said your side preferred simpler arrangements. My side. Like we were 2 separate companies entering a merger instead of a marriage. Every incident was small enough to deny individually. Together they formed something colder. Intentional. Then came Isabel, Victor's preferred alternative to me. I am 32 years old, daughter of a hedge fund manager, educated in Switzerland. Elegant, in the careful, expensive way magazine profiles describe women who have never worried about rent. I met her at a charity gala. Victor insisted we attend 6 months before the wedding. She greeted Daniel with a familiarity that instantly tightened something in my chest. "You disappeared on us," she teased lightly. Victor watched the interaction from across the room with visible satisfaction. Later that night, while Daniel was speaking with a colleague near the bar, Isabel leaned toward me and smiled gently. "Victor adores tradition," she said. "He struggles when life moves in unexpected directions." It sounded sympathetic. It was not sympathetic. It was a warning wrapped in etiquette. 2 weeks later, a planner accidentally copied me on an email thread not meant for me. Victor had written, "The engagement still feels premature. Daniel has a history of confusing admiration with permanence." Isabel's mother responded 20 minutes later, "There is still time for clarity before vows complicate everything." I stared at the email sitting alone in my office after everyone had gone home. Rain tapping against the windows. Computer screen glowing in the dark. That was the moment I stopped dismissing my instincts. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Taxes 2022 because nobody opens folders labeled Taxes 2022 voluntarily. Every strange email, every suspicious invoice changes, every forwarded message, every screenshot. I saved all of it there quietly without telling Daniel yet because I knew exactly what would happen if I confronted Victor too early. Men like him survive through narrative control. They rewrite events before anybody else understands the story. I needed proof stronger than denial. 3 months before the wedding, Daniel flew to Boston for work. Victor invited me to lunch at his club downtown while Daniel was away. White tablecloths, dark wood walls, waiters who addressed him by name before he sat down. Halfway through the meal, he folded his napkin carefully and finally stopped pretending. "You're intelligent," he said, "which means you probably understand this marriage creates complications." I kept my voice calm. Complications for who? For Daniel's future. He sipped water slowly. He comes from a family with expectations attached to the name. Those expectations exist for a reason. And I don't fit them? He smiled faintly. I think people usually marry within worlds they understand. There it was. Not loud, not emotional, just pure social exclusion delivered with surgical precision. I left lunch with my stomach burning and sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes before driving away. That night, I finally told Daniel everything. The comments, the emails, Isabel, the seating changes, all of it. He listened quietly, face growing tighter with every sentence. Then he apologized immediately for not seeing it sooner. That mattered to me more than any dramatic speech could have. He did not defend his father. He did not minimize it. He believed me the first time. But even then, neither of us understood how far Victor had already gone behind the scenes. 2 weeks before the wedding, my assistant walked into my office, holding an envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed packet nearly 40 pages thick. Emails, financial projections, property maps, internal notes from Hale Capital. Attached to the top was a sticky note with 6 handwritten words. You deserve to know the truth. I locked my office door and started reading. By page 7, my hands were shaking. Victor had been negotiating a development partnership with Isabel's family for nearly a year. The merger depended heavily on strengthening family alignment between both parties. Buried deeper inside the documents was a private memo discussing reputational concerns around Daniel's engagement to a first-generation entrepreneur lacking compatible social positioning. That was the exact phrase. Social positioning, like I was a branding issue instead of a human being. At the bottom of one email, Victor wrote, "Once Daniel understands the long-term implications, I expect the current relationship to resolve naturally." Resolve naturally. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at those words while traffic moved outside below my office windows. My entire relationship had apparently been treated like a temporary inconvenience, standing in the way of a business arrangement worth millions. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Check the audio files in the packet. There were 3 recordings attached near the end of the folder. The first was a voicemail from Victor speaking to Isabel's father. "Daniel confuses struggle with depth," he said casually. "He always has. Eventually, he'll realize compatibility matters more than emotion." The second recording was shorter. Victor spoke to someone I could not identify. The wedding itself may solve the issue. Public pressure changes people. But the third recording was the one that changed everything. It had been captured accidentally during a dinner meeting, according to the metadata. Silverware clinking, low restaurant music, voices muffled slightly. Then Victor speaks clearly enough to understand every word. "At the rehearsal dinner, I'll force reality into the open. She'll either leave voluntarily, or Daniel will finally see what marrying beneath his world actually costs him." I replayed that sentence 4 times. Marrying beneath his world. I suddenly understood why Victor had insisted on controlling the rehearsal dinner personally. He was planning a public humiliation severe enough to destabilize the wedding itself. I called Daniel immediately and drove to his townhouse. He listened to every recording, sitting motionless at the kitchen table. By the end, his face looked different somehow. Not angry exactly, older. Like someone discovering an entire section of childhood memories had been built on false assumptions. "I don't know who this man is anymore," he said quietly. Then he looked at me. "What do you want to do?" Most people think strength arrives as confidence. It does not. Sometimes strength arrives as absolute calm because your fear has finally burned itself empty. "We let him do it," I said. "Then we show everyone the truth." The rehearsal dinner was held at a private estate outside Annapolis, overlooking the water. 42 guests, candlelight everywhere, string quartet near the windows. Victor moved through the room, greeting people like a politician before an election. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect control. Isabel attended with her parents despite technically not being invited. That detail alone told me Victor believed he had already won. During dinner, I watched him carefully, completely relaxed, completely certain. Men like Victor rarely imagine consequences because consequences almost never reach them. Daniel sat beside me, unusually quiet all evening. Under the table, his hand stayed wrapped around mine so tightly I could feel his pulse. Dessert arrived just after 9. Chocolate torte, espresso, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. Then Victor stood slowly and lifted his wine glass. The room softened into silence immediately because powerful people train rooms to listen when they rise. "Before we celebrate tomorrow," he began smoothly, "I think honesty matters." There it was, the opening line he had rehearsed in his head 100 times. He spoke about family legacy, responsibility, standards, building futures carefully. Then his eyes landed on me. "Daniel has always had a generous heart," he continued. "Sometimes generous people mistake rescue for love." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Daniel went rigid beside me. Victor kept going. "Marriage is difficult enough without ignoring reality. Background matters, stability matters, shared culture matters. A person can work very hard and still not truly belong within certain worlds." He lifted the glass slightly toward me. "My son could have built a future with someone who understood our family completely. Instead, he chose someone whose life began very far from anything we value." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I remember hearing the faint sound of water outside against the dock beyond the windows. Victor smiled sadly like a man burdened by difficult truths. "I hope someday Daniel understands the difference between admiration and compatibility." Silence. Heavy, horrified silence. Daniel started to stand, but I squeezed his hand once and remained seated. Victor thought I was stunned. He thought shame had frozen me. In reality, I was waiting for him to finish destroying himself publicly. Finally, I stood slowly and picked up my phone from beside my plate. "You're right about one thing, Victor," I said calmly. "Honesty does matter." His expression changed slightly then. Tiny crack in the confidence. "Elena," he warned quietly, "this is not the moment." "Actually," I said, "I think you chose the moment yourself." Earlier that evening, I had connected my phone to the estate's media system during cocktail hour while everyone was distracted near the terrace. One tap and the projector screen behind Victor flickered to life. Confusion spread instantly across the room. Victor turned toward the screen. Then the recording started playing through the speakers. His own voice filled the room. "At the rehearsal dinner, I'll force reality into the open." Every guest froze. Victor's face was drained of color. The recording continued. "She'll either leave voluntarily, or Daniel will finally see what marrying beneath his world actually costs him." A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Victor stepped toward the projector. "Turn that off." I did not move. Another recording began automatically. "The wedding itself may solve the issue. Public pressure changes people." Now people were staring at him instead of me. That was the exact moment the power in the room shifted. You could physically feel it happen. Victor looked around desperately searching for allies. Isabel stared at the tablecloth. Her father looked furious. Daniel stood slowly beside me. Not to stop me, to stand with me. Then the final recording played. Eventually, he'll realize compatibility matters more than emotion. Victor lunged toward the projector table. "This is private business conversation taken out of context." His voice had lost all smoothness now. Guests exchanged stunned looks. One man actually removed his glasses and rubbed his face like he could not believe what he had just heard. Daniel finally spoke. Calm, clear. "You tried to humiliate the woman I love in front of our family because she didn't fit your social standards." Victor turned toward him immediately. "Daniel, you don't understand the pressure attached to protecting this family." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I finally understand exactly what kind of family this is." That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could have. Victor looked suddenly older under the candlelight, smaller somehow. Like authority itself had slipped away from him in real time. Isabel's mother stood first. She gathered her purse without speaking and walked directly out of the room. Isabel followed seconds later with tears in her eyes. Several guests avoided looking at Victor entirely. Others stared openly now, recalculating years of interactions through this new lens. Powerful people survive partly because everyone around them quietly agrees to protect the illusion. Once the illusion breaks publicly, everything changes very fast. Victor looked at me one last time. "You've embarrassed this family." I held his gaze steadily. "No, Victor, you did that yourself." Nobody defended him, not one person. Daniel reached for my hand, and together we walked out of the estate into the cold night air. Behind us, we could still hear Victor arguing inside with somebody near the dining room entrance, voice sharp and frantic now instead of controlled. The parking lot overlooked dark water stretching endlessly beyond the docks. Wind moved through the trees above us. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a man surfacing after being underwater too long. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about that question carefully before answering, because the truth mattered. "I think," I said slowly, "I just stopped apologizing for where I came from. We canceled the original wedding venue before sunrise. Neither of us wanted to stand inside spaces built around people who treated love like a transaction." 2 days later, we got married at a botanical garden outside Richmond with 30 guests instead of 200. My mother cried through the entire ceremony. Daniel's younger sister walked him down the aisle because she had stopped speaking to Victor after the rehearsal dinner. There were no investors, no politicians, no strategic partnerships disguised as relationships, just people who actually loved us, standing beneath strings of white lights while rain threatened softly in the distance. During the vows, Daniel looked directly at me and said, "You never needed permission to belong anywhere." I still remember how quiet the garden became after he said it. 6 months later, the development partnership between the two families collapsed publicly. Several investors backed away after recordings from the rehearsal dinner circulated privately through circles Victor had spent decades cultivating carefully. Reputation built his world. Reputation destroyed it too. Daniel rarely speaks to his father now, not because of anger anymore, because once you see someone clearly, pretending becomes exhausting. Last month, my mother visited our house for dinner and paused in the kitchen looking around at everything quietly: the hardwood floors, the bookshelves, the framed wedding photos. Then she touched my arm and smiled. "You built this yourself," she said. I almost corrected her automatically, almost said Daniel helped too. Then I realized what she actually meant. She meant life, the stability, the courage to stop shrinking around people determined to measure my worth by old money and old names and old systems built long before I was born. Most people spend years standing outside invisible gates, hoping somebody powerful eventually invites them in. But there comes a moment when you realize the gate was never the goal. The goal was building a life so honest that nobody else gets to define your value for you anymore. Some people will spend their entire lives trading authenticity for approval because rejection scares them more than emptiness. And for a while, that path looks easier, smoother, safer. But eventually, everyone reaches a moment where silence becomes more expensive than truth. Most people hesitate there. Most people retreat. Most people convince themselves that peace matters more than self-respect. But every once in a while, someone chooses differently.